think we're ready to go at our end. So thank you very much to everyone who's joining us today on this relatively sunny, at least not rainy, April afternoon. I'm Kate. I am Managing Director of the Consumer Brands team at Cirkle. For anyone who doesn't know us very well, we're a full service comms agency. We work across earned media and social media, which we're going to be discussing in great detail today. And then humble brag, we were recently named the EMEA Creative Consultancy of the Year at Sabres last month, as well as PRCA Mid-Sized Consultancy of the Year for the last 2 years. So we're extremely proud of where we've got to as a business. I'd like to think you're in good company, but in even better company with the speakers who are contributing today, and I'm going to introduce you to shortly. As you know, today's webinar is for brands who are looking to harness the power of earned media and really understand its potential and what it can do for your organisations to build trust and loyalty with consumers. And no question, we're operating in a very difficult financial situation at the moment, and building trust and maintaining market share for brands is becoming increasingly difficult, particularly when inflation is, of course, forcing prices up, and those price increases are being passed on to consumers. And with shrinking wallets, they're being forced to make difficult decisions about how they spend the money that they do have. We've seen as an agency many clients who've had their above the line budgets reduced, and as a result, our clients are having to be much more creative about their marketing spend and what channels and disciplines they use to make sure that they can really make their budgets work as well as possible. And that is where earned media comes in. And I think if it's done correctly, it can punch well above its weight. And deliver really measurable and tangible impacts for businesses, not only just driving brand love, but also purchase intent as well. We're also going to explore the use of harnessing culturally relevant moments as well, and how brands can pivot and adapt to a very fast changing landscape to create conversations with consumers like no other discipline can. So we've got an hour for the session today. We've got a report which really takes a deep dive into what consumers are looking for from brands, which I will send to everybody on this webinar after the session. And it's also available to download on our website at circle.com. So you will get that from me afterwards, and then by all means, and ask questions. And we're joined today by a fantastic lineup of brands in many sectors, lots of very big brand players from retail, QSR, beauty, FMCG, retail and leisure and entertainment, and to name just a few. But thank you very much for sharing your challenges. We're all in the same boat, so to speak. I think there's lots of consistent themes coming across from all of our attendees in this space. So we're going to do our best to address those challenges and questions and concerns in the discussion that we're going to have. And I would like to introduce you, of course, to our even better company, which is our fantastic speakers today. We have two industry leaders from two very different sectors who will be sharing their wisdom and insights and learnings on earned media today. First of all, we have Karen Wilkinson, who is Marketing Director for UK and Ireland at Axo Nobel, also one of Circle's very esteemed clients, and she has the pleasure of looking after the fantastic brand, which is Dulux. And quite possibly someone who has the best job in the world, Nigel Campbell, Chief Marketing and Engagement Officer at ZSL, looks after ZSL Conservation and also ZSL London Zoo and Whipsnade as well. So a fantastic charitable organisation with many learnings to share. We were also due to be joined by Karina Hardy from Innocent Drinks. Unfortunately, she was taken ill earlier today at very short notice, so can't join us. We wish her better very soon. There will be a chance to ask questions. Please pop them in the throughout if something springs to mind, and we will allow time at the end to do our best to answer those for you as well. So we're going to get straight into it, and I'm going to hand over to Karen and Nigel shortly. And thinking first, really setting about the role of earned media and the importance of knowing your consumer and the audiences that you're looking to target. And obviously earning attention and trust with families and consumers is harder than ever, and brands really need to be able to understand, demonstrate what families are going through to build that trust. And brand love can come through identifying and providing a solution, but it can also come through empathy and understanding the pain and pressure points that our audiences and consumers. The report that you'll see on our website shows that 1 in 3 families believe that brands have lost a grip on the realities that consumers face, and that number increases significantly when it comes to brands' understanding of consumers' financial situation. So it's a bit of a wake-up call for all of us, really, to really pay heed to that content and make sure that we are adapting our messages and talking to our consumers in a way that they understand and trust. So I was going to hand straight over to Karen. Karen, if you're happy to take the first question, just to introduce to the team today the role that earned media plays at Akzo Nobel in your marketing and communication strategy, and what changes, if any, you've had to make to your strategy because of the cost of living crisis.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for having me here today to share our approach to earned media. So yeah, at Akzo Nobel, and with our particularly, our main retail brand, Julep, earned media is hugely important, and I'd say never more than in the past 3 years. Actually, not just through the cost of living crisis you touched on, Kate, but I think when the pandemic started, we really had to take a step back and look at our whole comms approach and planning, and think about what messages we're going to land, or what did our audiences want to hear from us. And it was at that point, really, I guess, that I'd say our earned media approach became much more important and much more integrated in our total comms mix. And on one level, we've always used earned media to amplify our campaigns, amplify paid activities, but we realized actually that we needed to connect at another level, really around driving consideration. We're in a very fortunate place, as I know, London Zoo and many of the places that Nigel is representing as well, where you've got loads of awareness, but actually how do you keep that consideration, and more important, the engagement strong when there's a lot of other things going on. So I think, yeah, it's become more important to us than ever before to be talking to our audiences in a relevant way, a way that's got salience, in a way that really will drive consideration, and not just talking at people or amplifying the messages we want to tell them, listening to what they want to hear from us.
Brilliant, thank you. And then handing over to Nigel, just to build on that, from ZSL's point of view, how have you used earned media, and in what ways do you think it might be more effective in building brand trust than perhaps other marketing tactics that might have been relied upon in the past? Oh, Nigel, sorry, you're on mute.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Classic one. How often is that phrase used by everyone every day, I wonder? Quite often. We still don't learn, do we? Yeah, I mean, absolutely what Karen was saying, building on that, is that salience and for me, authenticity. And and that's the thing that really can sing through earned media, we found here at ZSL. And yes, absolutely, that combination of authenticity and authority, I think earned media still has that cut through and lends authority to content. But as much as, we used to approach sort of traditional media and think, oh yeah, that's great, this is something that's appeared in certain, national media channels, for example, then that's going to have a certain amount of influence. But I also view actually influencers as key elements of an earned media strategy, and we work with influencers a lot. I don't mean paid influencers, but genuine champions of the brand, particularly from things like Worlds of Entertainment. I think that because let's face it, you still earn their trust, you earn their imprimatur and their authority and their recommendations. So I think the definition of earned media has actually expanded quite significantly, and yeah, we've had some extremely successful strategies that have translated into serious bottom line advantage by using a combination of earned media, influencers, and obviously sort of the owned channels that we all use all the time. But it's about connecting with those audiences so well, and the power of earned media, I think, lies in narrative and storytelling for us. It's something where you can really add depth and passion and personality to your content and your comms. And I think that's what really matters to consumers and our audiences these days.
Brilliant, thanks Nigel. And just taking your point around this definition of earned media expanding, and to ask Karen a question on that point. And Karen, obviously you're leading the marketing efforts of a huge multi-brand organisation, which is a very complex task. How have you as an organisation ensured that your efforts are consistent and authentic across all platforms and audiences, now that we're going well beyond above the line advertising into many more channels?
Yeah, I think there's an element of actually looking at the ways of working internally and how communications are happening between our teams. We used to work in a way that actually our brand teams and brand comms were quite they weren't entirely independent, but the planning was happening against that brand and that specific audience. And now we work in a way that actually we come together, I think like triangles, I guess, of actually reviewing, does that make sense, what's happening on that channel versus this one, whether that's for complementary brands. So in our instance, we have a Dulux retail brand, but we've also got a Dulux trade brand, so that those teams were connecting on content plans. So even if we were, looking at what the campaigns were going to be different and what messages we want to get out there through earned channels, that actually there was an element of the right hand knowing what the left hand is doing, but actually also just really looking at right through the line and in a really integrated way of actually, what's happening on paid, what's happening on our owned, what's going out in our earned, and what's the timing of that. And also, Kate, having a connection into our corporate communications. I realize it depends on the size of your business, you may or may not have a separate corporate comms function, but that was an element that probably we worked in terms of marketing and corporate comms in a different way. And I think that was something we have come together. So building better ways of working, integration among our people and teams was the first step in bringing that together, and then making sure that our agency partners are really connecting in the way that we needed them to as well. So I think that ways of working, spending time talking about what are the different races and different groups and teams, and what's our kind of rules of engagement, who's signing off what, where's the visibility, just getting those kind of processes, dare I say, those kind of brilliant basics in place, but evolving them as our channels and plans and comms were changing, and the time frames at which we're turning them around were getting quicker all the time.
And how does insights feed into that, Karen? Your insight, and obviously we work with you, so we know, but for everybody on this webinar today, how does your insights team feed into that and share learnings around your audience's needs and situations?
Yeah, I think probably, again, I talk about, I kind of mentioned earlier on the pandemic being a real changing point for us, at least a kind of we had to think and act and plan differently and be more agile and listen more. Before the pandemic, I think we'd quite a structured kind of insights program where monthly, quarterly, annually we get different reports. Actually, what we started to do then was to do more dipstick kind of hot topic, going out to groups, using forums to understand. So in our category, checking in with decorator forums, what are homeowners saying to you, how are you feeling, what is worrying you. Equally on the home side, using kind of panels listed, dipping into those with short questions to get the mood of the audiences, because things were changing so quickly. And I think we did that in the pandemic. But actually, as we've moved through and looked, last September, October, November, with all the kind of how unsettled the whole nation was feeling, we continued that approach. So almost that little and often insight to complement some of those bigger maybe brand health studies, that happen only once a year, and you're looking at the results of those, say in February, but the sample or the research was done in November. So there's too much of a lag. So you've got to complement it with those real, quick, short, sharp insight gathering exercises that don't always need to be, they can be a bit quick and dirty in terms of going out to stores, going out talking to customers, getting feedback from sales, getting feedback from all the sources, using obviously social listening as well to make sure that we're connecting all the dots, but actually keeping our feet in the ground with what's really happening.
I think quite often it's some of those micro conversations that are a great temperature check for what's actually going on for certain audiences. You mentioned the pandemic, Karen, and obviously it's changed the way that we've all worked, and much we try to leave it behind, there's still lots of learnings we can take from it. And Nigel, I know you and I have had a conversation about ZS unbelievable pivot and the journey that you've been on as an organisation, because you were obviously closed during the pandemic. So it'd be really great if you could share how you've recruited new audiences and understood how to get people back through the door, so to speak, of the organisation when the doors opened again.
Yes, I mean, it was the ultimate in pivot. You know, one day we were open, and then the next day we were closed for the longest period in our 200-year history. The only other time, by the way, that our zoos were closed for any longer than one day, I think, because we only ever closed on Christmas Day, but was in World War II when during the Blitz, the zoos had to close, and Winston Churchill insisted after a week that we reopened to keep public morale high. So it was uncharted territory for us, and yes, obviously an existential crisis. Zoos are very expensive to run. They cost at least £1 million plus just a month, just to feed and look after the animals. So you can imagine that with no income, we had to be very inventive very, very quickly. So one of the things that we first of all thought, well, you know, if people can't come to us, we need to take the zoo to them. So we developed what we call the Zoo to You program, which was a whole suite of content, really audience driven, and so really integrated across our different audiences and channels. Yeah, we set about keeping people engaged. So the people that would normally come to us just for a one-off day visit, so through our social channels in particular, but also our members who had paid for, you know, a year's membership and weren't able to come to us. And then wider audiences, because it was also part of an influencing strategy to influence government and others to let us be amongst the first to reopen when that was possible in the pandemic. And also to provide the background to and the backdrop to our asks for our appeal, because we had to launch a survival appeal, Save Our Zoos, and that was not just sort of individual giving, but also trusts and foundations, and those real high net worth individuals who were going to give big chunks of money to help us stay open. So there was lots of different layers to our content and our earned media strategy, which was really central to the whole thing. And we wanted to, yeah, keep the public connected to the zoos, and so we innovated a range of things. So we in our Zoo to You engagement program, we did everything. You know, it was lovely content, and we innovated really quickly. We formed a really tight group of really creative people drawn from different disciplines right across the organization, and we really brainstormed, and we brainstormed every week, and then people took responsibility for going off and generating certain types of content, and then we had a kind of a twice weekly rapid fire stand up, so that we could, you know, really understand which bits were performing really well, which weren't, and how we could then evolve the story and the appeal for the next level. So there were all kinds of lovely things that came out of that, and the permission to innovate was really great. So a couple of highlights were we did mindfulness stuff. So at the beginning and the end of each day, we would film sunrise and sunset at Whipsnade Zoo, because people were feeling a little bit, obviously people were locked at home feeling very anxious. So things like that, sort of live streaming sunsets and sunrises, was just beautiful and calming, and people loved it and tuned in and made an appointment to do so. Another thing that really engaged our young audiences and our parents, a couple of things actually. We knew people were obviously schooling at home, so we recreated all of our educational materials in key stages, and we packaged them up so that people were able to use that to school at home, but also, you know, get our corporate messages across in terms of conservation, which was really great, and that kept people really engaged. And the other thing which worked phenomenally well was a thing that we called Tales from the Zoo, which was 6:30 on a Friday night. A keeper from the zoo and obviously the keepers still had to keep working. You can't furlough a penguin. So they would read a children's story, a themed children's story from the relevant enclosure. So the tiger that came to tea, for example, from the tiger enclosure. And we did that on Facebook Live at 6:30 on Friday nights, and that was phenomenally popular. And I think we won an award for that actually afterwards, which was very nice. So humble brag there. But yeah, and the result was that we kept our members with us. They viewed that as a way to support us. Our audiences, when we were able to come back, came back in floods. It was really great. And one of the interesting things was, because of international travel wasn't allowed, formerly, before the pandemic, that was 40% of our audience at London Zoo. Even when we reopened, that just wasn't there. But it was totally replaced by regional and local audiences who wanted to come back to their zoo and rekindle a relationship with it. And that was all really kicked off by what they'd seen and heard during the pandemic from us.
It's the ultimate pivot, like you said, incredible achievements. If I could pick on you, Nigel, just one more time before we move on to kind of cultural conversation. There's lots of brands on the call and retailers who would have been deemed as essential during the pandemic, and food and drink brands that I'm sure did pretty well. But there's lots of leisure and entertainment brands on here as well. And like ZSL, during the cost of living crisis, it could be argued that they're not seen as kind of essential spends. So I wanted to ask kind of how you engage audiences who may be under financial pressure, and how you've been able to make sure that you can be accessible and meaningful to people as possible.
It's a real challenge for everyone, isn't it? And I think people are making tough choices about their spends. But interesting, that doesn't necessarily mean that because something is higher priced, they're going to instantly cut that out. So we found that people are making more intelligent and careful choices about where they spend their spare cash. The first thing is that actually people are doing fewer things, but they are still spending on them. And a lot of visitor attractions and theatres and people in the leisure and tourist industry will know that actually highest price tickets are still selling out as quick as possible. Right across the demographic mix, actually, you will find that people are going, actually, we deserve and we need a good day out, and we'll cut other things and we'll make sure we have a brilliant time. And I think that's one of the fallouts of the pandemic. Actually, people are desperate to make memories and will still invest in that. And somebody said something quite impactful. It really sort of brought me up the other day. She said, well, I've got a 6-year-old daughter, and she spent almost a third of her life in lockdown. You think, oh my God, that's really startling. So people are still willing to invest in good times and good memories. I think that the expectations have gone really high, so you really have to deliver on that. But you were asking about the cost of living crisis for those people who's really hitting hardest. And last year we introduced our community access scheme, particularly recognizing this as a problem, because we're a high ticket price attraction. So we now have this help for households criteria we use for our community access scheme. So all of the kinds of additional income support that you would get, that you qualify for through the government's Help for Household scheme, we use that to enable people to buy a £3 ticket to get into the zoo, and that also applies to people with special educational needs and vulnerable people over 65. And originally it was supported by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, but we've now extended that to be a permanent thing, and it has gone absolutely crazy. It's been absolutely amazing. We've seen a whole new demographic coming into our zoos. It's been brilliant for us to be able to then use that as a conduit to engage them, both in educational stuff, conservation stuff, and interestingly, it hasn't meant that we thought there'd be no secondary spend in our shops and cafes, but actually they came in on a £3 ticket and then still continued to spend. And so that's been an income upside for us. And it's also filled the spare capacity that we have naturally in our zoos because of things like seasonality. So it's worked incredibly well. We've sold well over 150,000 tickets over the last few months alone. And it's really changed our business model forever, actually. And we're now looking at the modeling for how we can continue it in the long term.
It's an incredible success story. Thank you, Nigel. And I think we've already talked about kind of pivoting and the need to kind of adapt as organisations. We can't rest on our laurels now more than ever. And so moving on to the next part of the session, talking about being part of the conversation. And Karen, you touched on this as well, kind of this sort of little and often sort of consumer insights and really getting to understand kind of what consumers are talking about by listening to their conversations. And I think there's a really interesting sort of very stark contrast between paid media campaigns and what earned media can deliver, because naturally and understandably, paid media requires months of planning and has to be fairly rigid in its execution because of the way that it's set up. And that's where earned media can really come into its own. It can play a really significant role in being part of the conversation and be used very flexibly and quickly to adapt to changing consumer needs and conversations. But what's been really apparent from everybody attending the session today, there's lots and lots of brands and organisations and individuals on this call who have said that they're faced with a lot of challenges in this area. They understand the need to be flexible and want to be engaged and involved in the conversation, but are facing a number of challenges. And just to call a couple of those out, I think stakeholder buy-in internally was a key challenge that was flagged to me. Navigating time-bound communications was another one. And I think everybody kind of really agrees that if the people on the ground are given the autonomy that they need, they can be really, really responsive, but we don't always work in organisations that allow that to happen as freely as we might like. So would love to get views from both of you on that subject and kind of what you've done at your organisations to make this happen. And Karen, I think first of all wanted to ask you about how you as a brand, particularly with Dulux, stay on top of those cultural trends and how you use that knowledge to pivot your earned media strategy.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier on about trying to kind of keep our ear to the ground, whether that's through social listening, through kind of actually inviting customers in to talk to our teams as well and say what pressures are you finding, are you feeling, and then actually taking that away and thinking, well, what can we do? And I think a good example is perhaps the session that we had last year, probably last summer, with B&Q, saying, okay, people are feeling the pinch on their wallets, cost of living concerns are beginning to emerge. They hadn't really fully surfaced there. How can we keep people not just engaged with our category, but actually not postponing, not putting off the jobs they might have been planning to do, and what are they willing to pay more for? Because this isn't about kind of race to the bottom and just trying to get people into buy your brand because it's a cheap price. So really kind of having those open dialogues and sharing some challenges. And from that was born a campaign that involved supporting Shelter, the homeless charity, which is one of B&Q's lead charities. And that conversation of talking and sharing a problem led to, well, let's turn on something that we can do easily, quickly, and actually that will really connect with shoppers. And that wasn't a big paid campaign. That was a kind of, let's, for every can bought, we'll both contribute a charitable contribution to Shelter. And that was hugely successful, generated revenue, obviously, for both businesses, but ultimately donated to a good cause or an excellent cause. But also the amplification of that activity, because it connected with the shopper and was timely to people not just worried about their own situation, but also worrying about their communities that they were in, and charities not getting the funding that maybe they had before, really connected. And we were able to get not just great coverage for that, but great engagement in the activity. And actually it was one of the most successful things that we turned around quickly through listening, but actually sharing problems with our partners, our customer partners.
Thanks, Karen. Nigel, I wanted to ask you further to that point around content more specifically. And obviously, as a business, I'm sure you're able to switch content on and adapt according to consumer needs. How do you go about shaping that content for your audiences, and making, you know, and looking at how and how do you get them to engage with it? Do you run any tests beforehand? Oh, Nigel, I'm sorry. I've actually had to mute you earlier because there was a bit of interference on the line. Apologies, that was me this time. Oh, Nigel, sorry, I think you're still on mute.
There we go.
There you go. I can hear you. Thank you.
Yes, no problem. Yeah, we learned an awful lot, as I think we all did on this call from the pandemic, in terms of agile content creation. And I think formerly we would, you know, plan it out really carefully. We'd scratch our heads, we'd kind of storyboard it, we'd do all that stuff. We'd really go for a high quality. And I think definitely what we found was lower quality, but more timely, and, you know, from the heart kind of content really connects with people. And I think, you know, there's still a role for high quality video production, for example, but it's user generated content which really gets people going. And so what you want to do is, the object of the game is to interrupt the scroll, isn't it? You know, so people are just scrolling all the time. So what you want to do is have something that really pops, and sometimes that has to be really agile and quick. And we in terms of our content generation, we go with I think a few principles which hopefully people will find useful. First of all, is authenticity. You know, you have to be authentic, tell emotional stories, have a point of view, and do something for your community, as Karen was saying there, recognizing that those things really connect with people. So don't tell people what you're doing, show them the human, or and sometimes in our case, the animal impacts of what you're doing. I think, as I just mentioned, entrepreneurial is the other point, second point. Be prepared to grab that moment and get it out there as quickly as possible. You know, ask forgiveness, not permission. You know, it's usually fine. Creativity obviously is a core to it, but don't afraid to be funny, disruptive, surprise and delight people. Oh, I didn't expect that brand to be saying that, but that's actually, I'm rather pleased they did. So that confounds people's expectations. I think a couple of other important things with getting consumers to engage with your content is, I think, as Karen says, making sure that that you reuse, you recut, and you make sure that it can be seen across your platforms, so that people can engage with it in, you know, with the relevant diet and format in the different channels which they use. People are pretty profligate with the channels that they use, and it's really good for them to see that you've thought about that for the different channels which they're looking at. And the other thing is that along with all of that entrepreneurial stuff and the quick turnaround stuff, don't forget to create evergreen content. It's really important to still have that base layer of planned regular content that you know, goes out regularly. People know when to expect it. And in terms of earned media, you know, for example, twice a year we have a stock take in January, and an annual weigh-in of all our animals in August. And we do it every January and every August, and every time the national media flock to it because it just makes great pictures at great times of year. And the reason why we do it is because consumers really are expecting it. They absolutely love it. And for a business, it's really important because right at the beginning of January, it puts us on the map after Christmas. You know, the media is not quite so busy then, so we get the coverage, and it gets us really off to a good start in the year. And we do it just before the August bank holiday as well. Different thing, which is the weigh-in, where we create all these little props where we weigh everything from tiny ants to giant elephants, and that just reminds people at a key point in the end of the summer holidays, oh, I must go to the zoo, and it really works.
I was right, Nigel, when I said you have the best job in the business, undoubtedly, when you get to
I
do
thought-
these things.
I thought working with the Dulux dog was good. You've got a whole zoo full of animals to work with.
He's got it pretty good, hasn't
I
he?
was going to say, Kate, actually, just listening to Nigel as well, made me think that, you know, that little and often doesn't need to be polished, but actually the authentic, warm content that has an authentic tone of voice is so powerful. And we also find user-generated content is some of our best performing content. We made a very small, very modest, what we like to call media studio, but it's not a big space, it's not very sophisticated, but a room that we could actually use to film in and spend some time with our own people to say, right, let's see what we can do ourselves as well. It doesn't always have to be big and planned, paying influencers or gifting. We can do content ourselves, and we've got color consultants. We used those when we were working with Changing Rooms. We had an ad funded partnership with Changing Rooms while that series was running, to just try some Instagram live, see did people want help with selecting colors, how to do content. We know people are thinking, oh, you know, maybe I can't afford to change the kitchen, but could I paint the cupboards? Could I change it myself? How on earth do I do that? Where do I start? So having these, what we call Dr. Dulux clinics, or you know, help be there to help people either and showcase what others have done. So it's really credible as well. So give a platform for kind of people like you, you know, what they can achieve, you know, with a little bit of courage and a little bit of support. So I think that is really powerful, that homegrown, in the best sense of the word, authentic content that really connects. If it connects with you know, if it makes everyone in the building smile, then it's going to make people out in their homes smile as well.
Yeah, actually, I've written really similar note down, actually, Karen. I think you're absolutely right. And I think this is where brands need to make a real shift, and it's starting to happen. And as you said, Nigel, there's still a role for polished high-end content, and that's not going away, particularly for TV. But it is very expensive. And when marketing spends being scrutinised, there are cost-effective, quick and dirty, as we put it, Karen, but with the best of intentions, ways of producing engaging content. And where we've done that, we're actually seeing higher levels of engagement with consumers than we do from the more polished content when we use it in the owned and owned media space.
I mean, I was just going to say, Kate, there's no doubt about it. You need to have your brand guidelines. You need to be clear on your tone of voice. You need to bring consistency to that. It can't just be, you know, a scattergun. You know, you need to think about how you're going to format it to make it feel, you know, connected with your brand, and that there is a consistency and polish on it, but it doesn't have to be high production value. You know, all of us are being asked to do more with less, or no, we need to do more with less. And I think it's been brave enough to give that a go.
And actually, talking of guidelines and asking for forgiveness, not permission, I think the final sort of part of the question in this area, for you, Karen, and I know the answer to this because we work with you, but I think there's some really interesting learnings for the audience around how you navigate internal stakeholder approval at your end, and how you got into a place where you're able to respond as a brand in a very quick, agile way, in real time, to these cultural conversations, but also make sure that you're sensitive to those guidelines.
I think we've not always got it right. For anyone who saw our what we call Spursgate a few years ago, we had a really difficult time with not getting all the stakeholders aligned, and that wasn't about approvals. That was people responding, people understanding the right tone of voice. And actually, we've worked out that actually it's not just getting the approval routes right to go, are we all on track, does this fit what we're trying to achieve, but with a frame freedom on that. Actually, it's also having people lined up to respond. So when something goes out, that actually, you know, the people manning our phones and customer service, for example, if they get a call, that they know about it, they're aware of it, they know how to handle questions that might come in, they might be reacting to posts online, so that actually everybody knows what's happening when and how to respond. Some of that is as simple as, you know, kind of, I guess the regular content meetings, but also just having those connections internally and knowing who are your checklist of people that need to know that this is going to go live tonight? We don't have 24/7 manning of all our channels. So if something's happening on a bank holiday or whatever, just making sure that the right people need to know what's happening, so that there's a cohort that can either amplify something positively or react to it negatively, or manage it basically. But and equally, our customers, our sales teams, this is really powerful stuff. They want to know, they want to be able to also let their contacts know what's happening. So not forgetting those internal communications as well, of giving heads up of what's happening. So that internal stakeholder piece is really important. I think probably a bigger debate is when it gets to the strategic side of planning. I'll come back to that integrated comms planning for the whole year, about how much or how little are you doing this, how are you resourcing it, whether it's through people, through investment, what are you boosting, what's how are you tracking your KPIs, like that is a different stakeholder conversation. And I think in an organization like ours, we're operating in lots of markets. Not every market is at the same let's say maturity of their channels or using earned media. So sometimes we have those debates internally about what percentage you should be using of budgets on different activities. But certainly with regards to getting stakeholders aligned to make what you're putting out there thing, it's making sure everyone knows what's happening and is ready to get behind it. Like I say, we've been burnt and learned the hard way how critical that is, and how something small can travel out in that big wide world quite quickly, quite easily, and you all need to be ready for that.
I think talking about internal stakeholders as well, making sure legal are on board from the beginning, and there are certain guardrails that you're operating within, so everyone knows where they stand, and then the people on the ground have more flexibility to work quickly when they need to.
Absolutely.
On the KPI side of things, I wanted to move on to the last part of the conversation around maximising ROI and what success looks like for brands who adopt a very insight-driven earned media approach. And it continues to be a hot topic in our area, in our industry, doing what we do. But if the right questions are asked at the outset, it is possible to get to a very good place where you can measure not only PR and social outcomes, but also what tangible impact earned media is having on your businesses as well, and in terms of brand love and loyalty. So Nigel, you will need to unmute yourself in a second, I'm afraid, because I can't do it. I don't want to switch you up with the mute button, apologies. Wanted to ask about if you could give a recent example of an earned media campaign undertaken by ZSL, and what the goals of that campaign were, and what successes you saw.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many fun examples that I'll give you, but a couple of small ones which and we're very lucky because we've got some great things to work with here. But one example, which I mentioned a couple of these examples because it's a direct translation between earned media and the bottom line, which I think is really helpful, because so often it's very difficult to tease out all of the different elements of an integrated marketing and comm strategy to know whether the earned media bit of it is actually doing the business. And this was a piece of earned media that we got. We approached Channel 4. Actually, they were doing a series called One Night In, and it was with a group of comedians. Josh Widdicombe, Alex Brooker, Desiree Birch, and I think Guz Khan were the comedians. And you might have seen it on the TV. And they were they dropped them into visitor attractions and locked them in for a night and followed them around. And we knew that this was coming. What our link into it was that Josh Widdicombe happened to be a member of London Zoo, so he takes his children there and loves it. So we used that as a great opportunity to. I mean, we had to really go for it. We had to put a little bit of resource behind it in terms of staff, etc. But and we had to kind of take a slightly take the risks as they might come, because we didn't know how it was going to turn out. But it wasn't necessarily a campaign itself, but it was a brilliant opportunity. And they ran around the zoo doing all sorts of things at night, and then they stayed overnight in one of our lodges. And it wasn't 100% of what we would necessarily have very carefully curated in the past. But what was fascinating was that it translated within 48 hours into £48,000 worth of bookings for our overnight stays in our lodges, just because people had gone, that's the thing I want to do. And I think there are two things: that yes, the money was great, but B, it's also about aligning with people who are trusted and admired and followed for whatever reasons that might be. And so I think and I think only earned media can do that for you. So I think that's a great example of how you really can get cut through. And I think also, as Karen was saying earlier on, about aligning with issues as well. So audiences want the brands that they have in their lives to add to society as part of the deal now. So not just being plastic conscious or climate change conscious, but actually getting involved with issues and inequalities that are affecting everybody in their community. And I think that's a great way of really building the brand, building brand love and loyalty, and also doing what you should be doing as a brand anyway. But let me tell you about a couple of other small examples. So this is a little old now, it's going back to 2019 now, but we had an objective to promote the diversity and inclusion credentials of the London Zoo brand, reach more and more diverse audiences. And Pride Month was coming up, and obviously London Pride was about to be staged. And so we, by looking through the organisation, found a lovely story which we really wanted to dial up. And it was two male penguins called Ronnie and Reggie, who had partnered for life, as penguins do, and they don't always, they partner up in same-sex and non-same-sex relationships. Bless them, Ronnie and Reggie had adopted an abandoned egg that had been left by another pair of penguins, so they hatched this little chick together. And we thought, well, that's such a lovely story, we've got to do something with that. So so me and my team got together, and we came up with a lovely thing to engage new audiences, which was a kind of riff on the Stonewall "Some People Are Gay, Get Over It" campaign from some years ago. And we recreated it as "Some Penguins Are Gay, Get Over It." And we created some similar campaign materials, did some lovely little photo shoots with the penguins, and it just went absolutely crazy. It was amazing. The media obviously really lapped it up. And in fact, what I'll try and do is put, if I can, oh no, I can't. I'll post the URL so you can see it, read it on our website. Really, really nice. I'll try and find the picture and post it in the chat as well. But again, tracking sales, it was really interesting. There was a real spike in our sales 48 hours afterwards. We'd reached a new audience who were coming into London, but also the London based audience as well, who hadn't been to the zoo for a long time. And the diversity was really noticeable. I mean, it was anecdotal on the gate, but we could really tell that it had a direct connecting impact with our audiences. So that was really terrific as well. So just a couple of small examples there.
They're brilliant examples. Thanks, Nigel. I wish we could end on the penguin story. It's lovely and really heartwarming. I actually saw the One Night In programme, and interestingly, in the report that is now on our site, TV is still the #1 channel which engages consumers for earned media. So getting those stories onto broadcast channels is still really, really important for brands, really important. In the way that it's always been. And sustainability and brands which get involved in the community and addressing community issues, again, is the most important, two of the most important consideration factors for consumers when they choose brands as well. So both of those examples really speak to that. Ronnie and Reggie sound absolutely fantastic. I got a couple of final questions before we hand over to everyone else to ask theirs. Karen, I wanted to ask you about how you measure the success of earned media at AkzoNobel and what metrics as an organisation you find most valuable?
Yeah, we really take a look at what are we trying to achieve in the first place. So, you know, we always kind of start with our brand funnel, looking at actually where are our biggest challenges, and what are the brand challenges that we're looking to overcome or address, or opportunities to unlock. That's the first thing, what we're really trying to achieve. We kind of have a pyramid of acquisition, engagement, advocacy. So whether we're trying to really drive reach and awareness, whether we're trying to grow the people that we're talking to, we have a brand challenge with talking to younger audiences in particular. So people who haven't grown up necessarily with DIY happening around them. So trying to grow the number of people that are maybe following us. So depending on what the brand objective is, we'll have a different KPI. So it might be reach, it might be increasing our followers as subscribers, or database opt-ins in trade, for example. Or we might be saying, actually, we just really want to drive engagement with this piece, or advocacy. So let's see how many comments we can get. And that's where really, you know, UGC can really help. Engagement, obviously, different channels. You can have polls and different things. Different formats of content, I guess, that we'll also use. But I think we start with what is it that we're trying to achieve, and therefore what's the metric that's gonna help us with that. And obviously, I'm talking a lot online there when I'm talking about earned. But that is probably the first thing. Obviously, we love, you know, looking at kind of how much reach we can get, but you can actually get very big numbers, but you want it to be more than reach, deeper. For us, that's not our biggest challenge. Our biggest challenge is the consideration, the engagement, and preference. So yeah, that's kind of where we will pick different metrics depending on what our challenge is. I'm not sure if that's helpful, but it's not just a one dashboard that goes across everything.
And like you said, I think it's about asking the right questions at the outset from the brief to make sure those benchmarks are in place. Otherwise, it's extremely hard to do the job justice in hindsight.
Yeah.
So those questions need to be asked right at the beginning.
And obviously, sorry, commercials, you know, that goes without saying, commercials, but generally in the earned space, we're looking for those brand metrics. And if the commercials come, I haven't got as amazing stories as the lodge that Josh Widdicombe stayed in, but you know, we know, for example, we launched Colour Trends, Colour of the Year. We don't launch that with the aim of necessarily driving volume sales in the market, but we do track volume sales in the market, and we can often see if we do some activity that features particular colours, we then go and look at the colour popularity later to see how it's translating, and that's more probably helping to showcase to those stakeholders the power, but it's not the reason, it's not the main reason that you're doing the activity.
Yeah, agree. And Karen, I've got one final question for you just to wrap up, which something, well, I would love to kind of make sure, you know, the narrative is permanently changing around earned media, but for all the brands on the call and agencies as well, how do you think we can translate the impact of earned media into a narrative, particularly inside the organisations that you work in, that feels really compelling and as commercially clear as paid?
That's a great question, Kate. I think I'd need the FD to answer that one, in truth. I think you've got to look not just at, you know, market share and those KPIs. You've got to get an understanding of how important, let's say, that the saliency of your brand, the brand power, the brand love, get the message through, that there's an understanding within the organization that these things are allowing you, perhaps in our instance, to charge more for your brands when costs are increasing within the business, and you've got to, you know, at times pass some of that on, that actually it's these activities, it's the power of your brand, the brand love, the relevance and the salience that you have with your audiences that enable you to do that. And you know, and still have people want your brands, so paying more, worth the extra, worth paying more for. And it's more than the product they're buying. We know that as marketers, we know that as brand advocates, but I think it is really showcasing the so what. It shouldn't just stop at we do this and we increase our engagement. It's like, well, what does that allow us to do? So I guess there's an element of educating the commercial stakeholders in the business who are, it's quite easy to go, well, there's a squeeze on this element of the P&L, so X% needs to go from this or that. But actually it's really having your voice at the table around the investment that's needed, and then the mix that is needed, how you're going to invest that. And it's not necessarily all about putting it in one channel or another, as we know, and really showcasing the role of the different types of channels that you're using in the mix, your comms mix, so that there's an understanding of what is creating that brand power ultimately.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point that you make there, actually, Karen, about understanding properly about what the outcome is of the engagement, and therefore how you measure it. And we always go by an adage of what we want people to think and feel and do. And that can be stratified across all of the different audiences and what their starting points are and where you want them to end, but always giving them that call to action, that ability to continue on a journey with you somehow. And it can be complicated, it can be very simple, but it's that's how you can then start getting those engagement measurement points, and you can feed that back into the business, which is really important. Hopefully protect your budget.
Yeah, and we're playing a long game here, aren't we? Short-term commercial gains are fine in and of themselves, but they're not going to build brands for the long term, and that loyalty is so critical.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today. I'm really conscious that we've only got a couple of minutes left, and there's a few questions that have popped up, so I was going to shout them out to you both very quickly, to take them as you will. And the first one is around any thoughts on kind of the ratio of spontaneous versus planned content that you aim for as a brand. Equally, I'm happy to answer that from a Cirkle point of view.
Yeah, I mean, we always plan for, at least 10% reactive, at least. I think a couple of easy examples we had recently was, we were delighted the Old English Sheepdog came second in Crufts on a Sunday night, that kind of thing that you can comment and post and create some content around the Dulux dog, or push that message. But, I think we always plan for, at least 10-15% of, let's say, spontaneous content. We make sure first we have our hero and our kind of hygiene plan, and it's that hub kind of messages, I guess, of what's going to drive engagement at the time, in the cultural relevance of the moment.
Absolutely, we do the same. We have annual, we have seasonal, you can have variations in the week, certain days of the week you want to pump out certain types of content because that's how you think people are feeling. So there's that regularity, and then there's the the ability to go, oh, something's just been born, let's take a picture of it and get that out there, or whatever it happens to be. Or it might just be a cultural meme that's just blowing through and you just want to grab it whilst you can because that's really important. So yeah, Karen's right, retaining at least 15%, ideally 20% of ability to bandwidth to be able to react.
And I think as an agency, certainly for the social channels we run on behalf of our clients, we're seeing that percentage towards reactive increase over time as well.
Yeah.
And our clients' organisations aligning with that in terms of ways of working.
Yeah.
Probably just one more quick question. What is your advice on the best way to work with influencers for content on earned? Another big question potentially. We might have to take some of it offline.
I'll jump in because it's something we're talking about right now.
Yes.
I guess it's again coming, what are you trying to achieve? Are you using an influencer for a short one-off gain a share of voice on something, and you're using them for that, or are you actually building a slightly longer term relationship? For me, ultimately, the authenticity of the influencer connecting with your brand is hugely important. That's the start point. Really thinking about, if you are going down a route of paying an influencer, what's in those terms? Like, how long can you use the content, or how much are you expecting to get from it? How long can you use it? Is there exclusion periods? You don't want them showing up with another brand, the following week. So authenticity is absolutely key, that they're doing something that really just naturally fits, and that their values, as what they stand for, what their brand is, has a good synergy with your brand. I know some brands will use influencers to create content. For us, we use them a bit more to reach new audiences through them, and if they have a in our world of inspiring people, if they're somebody that have making over home, young family, whatever, that really fits with the type of influencers we look to work with, or in the decorator space. We're trying to encourage younger decorators into the industry. If we've got some young decorators who are doing great stuff, we always want to showcase them as the kind of the role models to attract others. But yeah, I think it's a big topic, and I think you have to have your influencer strategy clear and your influencer objective in the first place.
I think that's
absolutely. I totally agree. Sorry, Kate.
No, sorry, go for it, Nigel.
Yeah, I was just about to say, yeah, Karen's absolutely right. It's about longer relationships. It's about growing those and nurturing those relationships, making sure that when you initiate them, that the values match is really close with what you are as an organization, not just what you want to say or who you want to reach. Yeah, we've got some really long-standing influencers. We never pay influencers at all, and that strength of relationship really does come through in terms of the authenticity of the content that they produce and distribute for us. So it's worth making sure that you get it right and be in it for the long haul.
Yeah, I'd add one more thing, that actually if your content is good and clear and your strategy is clear, actually influencers come to you wanting, and we've just had that. I had a message in LinkedIn last Friday, spoke to somebody on Tuesday saying, I'm doing this and this, would love to have you work with us. And you go, well, that's when actually, you know, they're coming to you because they connect with your brand values and content that you're doing as well.
And of course they're consumers in their own right, so you know that you're doing things well when that happens. Just one final question, but I think I can answer this one because I'm conscious that we need to wrap up now. Talking about cultural moments, do you have anything exciting planned for the coronation? And my answer to that is keep an eye out on Dulux's social channels, because there is something coming over the weekend. So, and I'm sure ZSL and Zoom will be doing something fun as well. I'm conscious we probably need to wrap up there. I just want to say a huge thank you to Karen and Nigel for your time and your expertise and your insights. Really appreciate you taking part today, and to everybody who's joined us. Hope you found it useful and thought-provoking. It's a huge topic. We could talk for hours on this, but the reports on the power of our media are on our website, and please feel free to contact me directly as well if you want to continue the conversation in any way. But I hope you've enjoyed, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Nice to see you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.